They had already signed his death warrant. Shadow, a legendary Navy SEAL dog, survived war, but not the loss of his handler. Broken, dangerous, and beyond saving, he turned on everyone who tried to help him. Until one night, during a violent storm, a 7-year-old girl walked into his cage alone, holding nothing but a small harmonica from the man he once loved. She played one fragile melody, and the unstoppable war inside him suddenly went silent. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The morning sky hung low and heavy, thick clouds pressing down over the base as if the storm had already begun, though no rain had yet fallen. Base Commander Nathaniel Cross stood alone in his office, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s whose presence carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent a lifetime making decisions others could not. His hair, once jet black, had begun to grey at the temples, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a face hardened by years of command. There was a permanent tightness around his eyes, not from anger, but from memory. War had a way of carving itself into a man, leaving behind lines that no rest could erase. Cross was known among his officers as precise, disciplined, and unshakably rational. He believed in order, in protocol, in the kind of clarity that only came when emotion was set aside. But this morning, something in him resisted. On his desk lay a single document, clean, clinical, final. Behavioral euthanasia authorization. The name printed beneath it felt heavier than the paper itself. Shadow. Cross exhaled slowly, his fingers hovering just above the signature line. He had signed orders that sent men into combat zones they might never return from. He had written letters to families, informing them that someone they loved had died for reasons that could never fully be explained. But this felt different. Not because Shadow was just a dog, but because he wasn't. Shadow had been one of the most effective multi-purpose canines ever deployed by the Navy. A 75-pound German shepherd with a powerful, muscular frame built for endurance and speed. His coat, a striking blend of black and deep tan that once gleamed under desert sun. His amber eyes were sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He had been trained not only to detect explosives and track targets, but to move in perfect synchronization with his handler, anticipating commands before they were given. In the field, Shadow wasn't just an asset, he was a partner. That partner had been Chief Petty Officer Ethan Walker. Ethan Walker had been the kind of man soldiers trusted without question. 35 years old, lean and athletic, with sun-browned skin and short-cropped sandy hair that never quite stayed in place. His jawline was rough with the constant shadow of stubble, and his eyes carried a calm intensity that steadied those around him. He rarely raised his voice, but when he spoke, people listened. There was a quiet humor about him, too dry, understated, often delivered with the faintest curve of a smile. But beneath that calm exterior was something deeper, a fierce loyalty that defined everything he did. Walker hadn't just handled Shadow. He had lived with him, trained with him, bled with him. The two had deployed together more than 40 times across some of the most hostile environments in the world. They moved as one, breathing, reacting, surviving in perfect harmony. In after-action reports, operators described it as unnatural, as if the dog could read Walker's thoughts. But war does not reward perfection forever. It takes, and it takes until there is nothing left. The mission in the Korangal Valley had been routine, on paper. Intelligence suggested a high-value target, hidden within a remote compound. The team moved in under cover of darkness. Walker and Shadow led the breach. Then the world exploded. An improvised explosive device, buried beneath loose dirt and triggered by pressure, detonated less than 10 feet from Walker. The blast tore through the courtyard, sending shockwaves through bone and air alike. Shadow had been thrown violently against a wall, his body absorbing impact that should have killed him. For several seconds, there had been nothing but ringing silence. When Shadow regained consciousness, the world had already changed. Smoke, blood, the metallic taste of destruction. And Walker, gone. The official report described what happened next in cold, measured language. It noted that Shadow, despite severe injuries, had crawled back through the blast zone, that he had positioned himself over Walker's body, that he had engaged approaching threats with lethal efficiency. It called it instinct, training. But those who had been there knew better. That wasn't instinct. That was loyalty refusing to let go. It had taken 3 men to pull Shadow away. He had fought them ferociously, desperately, as if they were trying to take Walker from him again. In the end, they had no choice but to sedate him. Something inside him broke that day. Back at the base, the transformation was undeniable. Shadow no longer recognized commands. He no longer trusted hands reaching toward him. Every movement triggered a violent reaction. Every sound became a threat. The dog that had once operated with surgical precision became unpredictable, dangerous in a way that could not be controlled. Handlers rotated in and out. Specialists attempted rehabilitation. None succeeded. Some left with injuries. Others refused to return. 8 months passed, and the reports became consistent. Unmanageable, high risk, non-recoverable. Cross closed his eyes briefly, as if the words themselves carried weight. This was the system he believed in. A system built to make decisions based on facts, not feelings. And the facts were clear. Shadow could not be brought back, which meant he could not be allowed to remain. Cross picked up the pen. For a moment, his hand hesitated not out of doubt, but out of something quieter, something heavier. Then he signed. The ink settled into the paper with quiet finality. Outside, the wind began to rise, brushing against the windows like a distant warning. And somewhere, deep within the reinforced walls of a high-security kennel, a once legendary war dog paced in silence, his mind trapped in a battlefield that no longer existed. The fog rolled low through the redwood forest, thick and pale, swallowing sound and shape alike, as if the world itself had chosen silence over truth. Daniel Mercer stood at the edge of the transport bay, hands buried deep in the pockets of his worn canvas jacket, watching the armored vehicle idle with a low mechanical hum. He was a man in his early 40s, lean but not frail, with a body shaped by years of field work rather than discipline. His dark brown hair fell unevenly around his ears, often unkempt, and a short, rough beard traced his jawline, giving him the appearance of someone who had long stopped caring about mirrors. But his eyes were sharp, steady, and deeply observant, the kind of eyes that didn't look at a problem, but through it. Daniel had once been an army ranger, not the loud kind, not the decorated face of recruitment posters. He had been something quieter, methodical, precise, the kind of soldier who survived not by force, but by understanding patterns others missed. But years ago, during a mission that went wrong in a way reports could never fully explain, Daniel had lost more than teammates. He had lost faith in the idea that war could be controlled. He walked away from the military soon after, carrying with him a belief that some wounds could not be treated with orders, only with patience. Now he ran this place, a sanctuary hidden deep within Northern California's redwood forest, a place where broken military dogs were sent when the system ran out of answers. The rear doors of the armored vehicle swung open with a metallic clang. Inside, strapped to a reinforced steel gurney, lay Shadow. Even sedated, the dog radiated tension. His powerful chest rose and fell in uneven rhythm, muscles twitching beneath his matted black and tan coat. Scars ran along his flank, faint, but visible enough to tell stories without words. His muzzle was secured with a thick leather restraint, and even in unconsciousness, his paws shifted slightly, as if still searching for something lost. Two military handlers stood nearby, both wearing heavy bite suits. One of them, Staff Sergeant Colin Briggs, was a tall, broad man with closely shaved hair and a square jaw that looked permanently set in irritation. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest, posture rigid, his eyes never leaving the dog. Briggs had been part of Shadow's last rehabilitation attempt. He carried the kind of frustration that came from failure he refused to accept. "You're wasting your time," Briggs muttered, his voice low but edged with certainty. "We tried everything. He doesn't respond, doesn't listen, doesn't trust." Daniel didn't look at him. His gaze remained fixed on Shadow. "He does all those things," Daniel said quietly, "just not for you." Briggs let out a short, humorless breath. "That dog broke a man's arm through Kevlar. You think patience is going to fix that?" Daniel finally turned his head slightly, just enough for Briggs to catch the calm in his expression. Not arrogance, not defiance, just certainty. "I don't think anything is going to fix him," Daniel replied. "I think he's already exactly what he's supposed to be." Briggs frowned, clearly unimpressed. "Yeah, and what's that?" Daniel's eyes shifted back to the dog. "Lost." The word hung in the air longer than expected. The transfer process was quick, efficient, and distant. Papers were signed. Chains of responsibility were passed along like objects instead of lives. To the military, Shadow was no longer a soldier. He was a liability, something to be contained until its end was carried out. But as the gurney was rolled out into the cold, damp air, something shifted so subtle it might have been imagined. Shadow's ears twitched. Just once, Daniel noticed. He said nothing. Sector 4 was separate from the rest of the sanctuary, not just in distance, but in intention. It stood alone, a cinder block structure, reinforced with steel doors and soundproof walls. No windows at eye level, no external distractions. It wasn't built to comfort. It was built to contain what others couldn't reach. Inside the enclosure, the lighting was dim, tinted slightly red to reduce sensory triggers. The iron bars were thick, unyielding. The concrete floor showed faint marks, scratches left behind by others who had fought battles no one else could see. When the restraints were removed and the sedatives began to wear off, Daniel remained inside the room, seated quietly in the far corner. No sudden movements, no commands, just presence. Shadow woke like a storm breaking. His body jolted upright, breath sharp and violent, eyes snapping open with a wild, unfocused intensity. For a fraction of a second, there was confusion. Then recognition twisted into panic. He lunged. The impact against the bars echoed through the room with bone-shaking force. Teeth clashed against metal. A deep, guttural snarl tore from his chest, raw and unfiltered. He moved fast, too fast, circling, striking, reacting to ghosts only he could see. Daniel didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched. Not the aggression, not the danger, but the fear behind it. Hours passed, then days. Daniel tried everything he knew not to control, but to understand, sitting silently for hours, avoiding direct eye contact, leaving food without presence, allowing distance without pressure. Shadow refused all of it. He would not eat when Daniel was near, would not rest when footsteps echoed outside the door. His body remained coiled, ready, as if the war might return at any second. 14 days slipped by. No progress, no breakthrough, only silence, and the sound of something slowly breaking further apart. Late one evening, Daniel sat alone outside the enclosure, exhaustion settling into his bones. His hands rested loosely between his knees, head lowered slightly as if carrying a weight he could no longer name. He had seen men like this before. Soldiers who came back from war physically intact, but unreachable in every other way. And deep down, he knew the truth. Shadow didn't need discipline. He didn't need commands. He needed something far more dangerous, something no system could provide, a reason to come back. And as the fog pressed heavier against the walls of the sanctuary, Daniel realized something he had not wanted to admit. He might not be the one who could give it to him. The storm arrived without warning, the sky splitting open with violent thunder as cold rain lashed against the sanctuary, turning the quiet forest into something restless and alive. Lily Mercer stood by the window of her small bedroom, her fingers lightly pressed against the cool glass, watching the trees sway under the force of the wind. She was 7 years old, slight in frame, with pale skin that seemed almost translucent under dim light, and long chestnut hair that often fell messily over her shoulders. Her eyes were a soft grey blue, too observant, too quiet for someone her age. Since her mother's death 2 years ago, Lily had changed. She no longer spoke much, not because she had nothing to say, but because words felt unnecessary. She preferred silence, drawing, watching, listening. And she had been listening. For days now, through the walls and across the distance, she had heard it. The sound from Sector 4. Not barking, not anger. Something deeper. A sound that trembled with something she recognized immediately, even if she could not explain it. Grief. Lily understood grief. It lived in her chest the same way it lived in the silence of the house after her mother was gone. It came at night, when everything was still, when even breathing felt louder than it should. The way Shadow cried, it felt familiar, not frightening, just lonely. Another crack of thunder shook the window. Lily flinched slightly, then looked toward the dark outline of Sector 4 in the distance. The storm had grown worse. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging the entire sanctuary into darkness. For a moment, there was nothing. Then came the sound. A violent crash, metal against force. A deep, guttural noise that tore through the storm itself. Shadow. Lily's breath caught, her small body stiffening. This wasn't the quiet, distant crying she had grown used to. This was something else, something breaking. Down the hallway, she heard the front door slam open, her father's voice calling out orders to someone outside, likely Jonah Reed, the young assistant who worked night shifts at the sanctuary. Jonah was in his early 20s, tall and lanky, with curly dark hair and an easy, nervous smile that rarely appeared when things went wrong. He had grown up around animals, but had never seen anything like Shadow. Even he kept his distance from Sector 4. Lily stepped into the hallway, her bare feet silent against the wooden floor. The house was empty now, the door left open, the storm calling from outside, and the sound still coming. She didn't think. Not the way adults did. She simply moved. The keys hung where they always did, on the small wooden rack near the kitchen. Heavy, cold. She had seen her father use them many times. She knew which ones opened which doors. Her hand hesitated for only a second before she took them. Then, almost as an afterthought, her eyes shifted toward the desk, toward a small box she had seen her father open once, long ago. Inside it were things that didn't belong to this place, things that belonged to someone else. She opened it, and there it was, a harmonica, old, slightly tarnished, its metal surface worn smooth in places where fingers had once held it often. Lily didn't know the man it belonged to, but she knew it mattered. She could feel it in the way her father handled it. Carefully, respectfully, like it held something more than memory. She took it. Outside, the rain hit her instantly cold, sharp, soaking through her thin pajamas within seconds. But she didn't stop. She walked towards Sector 4, her small figure barely visible through the sheets of rain, guided only by instinct and something she couldn't name. Inside the building, the air was thick and heavy. The faint emergency lighting cast everything in a dull red glow. The sound was louder here, violent, chaotic. Shadow was no longer pacing. He was fighting, throwing his body against the bars with reckless force, teeth slamming against iron, claws scraping desperately against concrete. His breathing was ragged, uneven, as if he were drowning in something invisible. His eyes wide, unfocused, did not see the room. They saw something else, something far away. Lily stepped closer. The dog froze. Not completely, not in calm, but in recognition of something new, something different. He turned slowly, muscles tight, body low, a deep growl vibrating through his chest. This was the moment every adult would have stepped back. Lily didn't. She raised the harmonica to her lips. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from the cold, and she played. The sound that came out was imperfect, soft, uneven, but it carried something no training command ever could: memory. The first note hung in the air like a fragile thread. Shadow's growl faltered. His ears twitched. Another note, then another. The storm outside continued, but inside, something shifted. The violence in his body hesitated, like a wave pulling back just before it crashes. His breathing slowed not much, but enough to matter. His eyes, once wild and distant, flickered with something unfamiliar. Recognition. Not of Lily, but of what she carried. He took one step forward, then another. The aggression didn't vanish, but it changed, softened, confused. Lily kept playing. The melody wavered, fragile and broken, but steady. And for the first time since the war ended, Shadow stopped fighting. Morning came slowly, the storm retreating into a distant memory, as pale light filtered through the towering redwoods, leaving the sanctuary wrapped in a damp, fragile calm. Daniel Mercer had not slept. He stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the gravel road that cut through the forest like a scar waiting to reopen. Beside him, Lily sat quietly on the wooden steps, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, her small hand resting on the broad neck of Shadow. The dog remained close, pressed against her side, his posture relaxed but not careless. Even at rest, there was awareness in him now. Not fear, not chaos, purpose. The sound came before the sight. Engines. Low, controlled, deliberate. 3 black government vehicles emerged from the fog, moving in formation, tires crunching over wet gravel. They stopped in precise alignment, doors opening almost in unison. From the lead vehicle stepped Lieutenant Commander Connor Blake, a tall, sharply built man in his early 40s, his posture rigid with authority. His dark hair was cut short, his face clean-shaven, with a narrow jaw and eyes that carried no softness, only calculation. Blake was the kind of officer who believed in systems above all else. He had spent his career ensuring that nothing unpredictable remained uncontained. Shadow, to him, was not a story. He was a liability. Behind him followed Dr. Evelyn Hart, a woman in her late 30s, slender and composed, with pale skin and tightly pulled auburn hair secured into a low bun. She wore thin-framed glasses and carried a digital tablet pressed against her chest. Her expression was neutral, analytical, the kind of calm that came not from empathy, but from distance. She had built her reputation studying behavioral breakdowns in military canines, and she approached Shadow not as a soul, but as a case. 2 security personnel stepped out last, both heavily built, dressed in reinforced gear, their movements efficient and practiced. They did not speak. They did not need to. Daniel stepped forward. "You're not taking him," he said, his voice steady but firm. Blake didn't respond immediately. His gaze moved past Daniel toward Lily and Shadow. The dog had already noticed them. His body shifted subtly, rising from rest into readiness. His muscles tightened beneath his coat, ears angled forward, eyes locked onto the approaching figures. Not wild, not panicked, focused, protective. Blake took a slow step closer. "Dr. Mercer," he said, his tone calm but edged with authority. "The asset is being reclaimed under federal directive. Stand aside." "He's not an asset," Daniel replied. "He's not yours anymore." Dr. Hart stepped forward slightly, her eyes narrowing as she observed Shadow's stance. "Interesting," she murmured, almost to herself. "No signs of reactive aggression. Elevated vigilance, but controlled. That's unexpected." Shadow moved half a step forward, positioning himself directly between Lily and the approaching group. The message was immediate. "Do not come closer." One of the security men shifted his weight, gripping the handle of a control pole strapped to his back. Blake raised a hand slightly, signaling him to hold. "Let's keep this professional," Blake said. "We're not here to escalate." Lily stood up slowly, her fingers curling gently into Shadow's fur. "He doesn't want to go," she said softly. Blake looked at her, really looked this time. For a brief second, something flickered behind his eyes. Not empathy, understanding, and that made it more complicated. "That's not how this works," Blake replied. Shadow's growl came low, controlled, vibrating through the air like a warning drawn in silence. Dr. Hart's fingers moved quickly across her tablet. "Commander," she said, her voice quieter now, "if we force separation, we risk regression. Possibly worse than before. The bond is structurally significant." Daniel didn't move. "You take him, you break him." Blake exhaled slowly. For a man who believed in control, this moment offered none. He studied the dog again. The posture, the restraint, the precision of movement. This was not a malfunctioning weapon. This was a soldier with a new directive, and he was executing it flawlessly. Blake took a step back. The tension shifted. Not gone, but changed. "We'll review the situation," he said finally. "This isn't over." Daniel nodded once. "No, it isn't. But for now, it was enough." The vehicles left the same way they arrived, quiet, controlled, disappearing back into the fog. Time moved forward, not all at once, but steadily. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and Shadow stayed. Not as a weapon, not as a liability, but as something else entirely. A year later, the forest looked different. Or maybe it was him. Lily ran across the open field, her laughter cutting through the quiet morning air, light and unrestrained. Her hair, longer now, moved freely behind her, no longer weighed down by silence. Shadow ran beside her, not ahead, not behind, with her. His coat had regained its strength, thick and clean, catching the light in shades of deep black and warm gold. His movements were fluid, effortless, no longer driven by tension, but by presence. When Lily stumbled, he turned instantly, circling back, nudging her gently with his nose. Not urgency, not fear, just care. She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. Shadow stood still, eyes closed, at peace. The war inside him had ended. Not because it was defeated, but because it was no longer needed. And somewhere, beyond commands and control, beyond systems and orders, something quiet had rewritten everything. Not power, not force, but love, without fear. Sometimes, what the world calls broken, God still calls worthy. Miracles don't always come with thunder or light. Sometimes they come through quiet love, through a small act of courage that changes everything. In our lives, we all carry wounds no one sees, and maybe healing doesn't come from fixing, but from being understood. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your path, no matter how dark the storm may seem.